risk, for example. So it's we're going to be in a different decision-making framework. Next slide. The other thing we're doing is oh, this is static. It was supposed to be animated. The other thing we're doing is we're swapping the role of the PRA. In the current fleet, we started with a deterministic approach. We added PRA and said, oh, where do we overdo it? This time we're starting with PRA and we're adding defense in depth and safety margins. That's going to change the way that we have to look at these results, how we use them, how we rely or don't rely on defense in depth and safety margins is going to be a much different decision-making framework in my view. And those PRA results are going to change over time because despite the fact we have some experience with these operating reactors, we're not building off of thousands of reactor years of operating experience like we are here today. And so we need to, as we move into this, I think we'll have new challenges. It's not to say we can't do this or shouldn't do it. NEI submitted the LMP under NEI document, and companies are using it. It's just a cautionary note that we need to be thoughtful as we move through this process. That last slide. All right, some closing thoughts. So PRA is here to stay. It's an important tool. Risk-informed decision-making is part of what we need to do as we go forward, for sure. It gives us a better safety focus. It allows us to optimize both design and operations in ways that we can't get there with deterministic. But at the same time, we shouldn't pretend that uncertainties don't exist. They do. Getting a number out of CAFTA or out of SPAR is not the end. It's the start of understanding what the PRA is telling you. We have to continue down this path using PRA in the ways that its strengths are maximized and its limitations are managed through the models and the uncertainties. And we need to end up at the end of the day with good decisions. I'm not trying to be sort of an anti-PRA realism. I fundamentally believe we have to move in the direction of having realistic models because it allows you to make better decisions. I wanted to paint a picture as we entered into this dialogue that we need to be thoughtful as we move through this and do this in a way that puts us towards that goal of good decisions. And if we have time or you're willing, I'd be happy to take any questions or challenges.
All right, so we are just going to do a quick check to see if there are any questions in the room. Again, if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll run the microphone to you so we can make sure that the folks that are participating virtually can hear you. So any questions this morning so far? I know everybody's still probably waking up and the coffee's still kicking in. All right, looking quiet. Sure, let's see if we have any questions online. If you have a question online, please use the raise your hand feature and we will promote you so that you can unmute your microphone. Here, let me give this back to you. All right, so Michael Keegan.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Very good. I'm Michael Keegan. I'm a sociologist, and 45 years ago, I encountered PRA in statistics and research design and methodology. PRA has no predictive value. It only gives you a frequency of how often something's going to occur. And you don't know when the black swan's going to show up, but you rely on it in your model and in your rationale as if you did. Now, there's a whole lot that you're leaving out of the model, and that is all the deferred inspections, all the exemptions, all the fire protection plans at Palisades, which have been out of compliance since 2006, and they're about to get exemption to start up still not in compliance. We're talking about situations such as Davis-Besse, when there was laminar cracking on the secondary containment. Engineers were saying, don't go to restart. This needs to be repaired. There's a high probability of the containment crashing into critical equipment. Their report, their decisions, their recommendations were overridden by management. PRA is nothing more than a crutch that allows the NRC to not look at safety and consider production over safety every time. You have omitted from the equation all the high probabilities of the equipment not being in compliance. Temporary welds
Sir,
that will
sir,
last.
sir,
Yes.
Sir, do you have a question for our speaker?
Yes. How can you rely on PRA as a predictive value when it has no prediction? It only will tell you a frequency. You're using it as a crutch. Why do you use it as a crutch? To get to production over safety. Thank you.
I think we use it as a tool, as part of a risk-informed decision that considers the PRA result. That's the defense in depth and safety margins. And I think as I started, in fact, the first bullet of my presentation was that as we've used this, we've actually found that plants have gotten safer because we focused on the things that are most safety significant. I agree it's not a predictor of when something's going to happen. It can't be. It's an expression of our state of knowledge in an averaged sense. And I think we try to use it within a risk-informed decision-making framework that attempts to account for its capabilities and address its limitations.
I believe your design is flawed.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to ask Kevin Coyne to come up now. Thank you, sir. Do you want microphone? Yeah, that's okay. Here, hold on, please. Please introduce yourself if you would.
Chris Hunter, Office of Research. I think overall we do a pretty good job of acknowledging uncertainties. We calculate parametric uncertainties. We perform sensitivity calculations, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in the end we do all this stuff, but I don't think we really do a great job of actually incorporating all that work into our decision making. Do you kind of agree with that? Or, I mean, obviously we can always improve at anything, but I just feel, I think we don't do a great job at that.
It's I won't use that terminology, but I think it is the hard part of making a decision. I mean, the really comfortable thing about deterministic analysis is you bound your input assumptions and then you have a black and white line. 2200 degrees is the peak clad temperature limit. If you're 2199, you're safe. If you're 2201, you're not. And you don't have to decide, there's no decision to be made. And I used to have a slide I used with ACRS on this years ago that talked about how PRA, you get a bunch of information. You get the whisker chart of the parametric uncertainties. You get the different data points with their own whiskers on each of the sensitivities, and it makes it harder to make those decisions. I think NUREG 1855 does a nice job of trying to lay that out, but I don't think we've ever figured out how to present a decision maker with that information consistently. I made a couple of runs of this in my career back in the day, and it is hard. It's kind of the hardest part of this. And then when you overlay on that, what do we mean by defense in depth, and particularly what do we mean by safety margins, sufficient safety margins? I think it is the hardest part. And but I think we have some good examples of how we've tried to use that. I actually think the level 3 PRA study does a pretty good job of trying to take a shot at that, particularly with respect to modeling uncertainties. But when you get down to an SDP or something like that, yes, I mean, SRA may have an opinion that it should be this way, and it's hard to sway that sometimes. Having been on the industry side, I sat there and listened to SRA say, "Well, we're not going to credit that operator taking that action." Well, why not? They're trained to do it. That's not a realistic answer. Well, got the SRA the answer they wanted. And I think we've moved past that in the last 5 or 10 years, a little bit more than we had been in before. But it definitely is the hardest part, because it's about the assumptions that go into not just the base model, but how you're applying the model that really drive that. I don't know. I don't think I answered your question. It's a very good topic, and one, like I said, I've taken runs at in my career. Some old EPRI work I did on this subject a couple of times, trying to, how do you integrate all this into and give it to a decision here? We actually had a rubric for how to present information to a decision maker. That was our attempt to try and figure that out. All right, thanks.
All right, we'll go ahead and go to Kevin. Kevin, if you could give us a couple sentences as to who you are and why you're here.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Coyne. I'm the senior level advisor for PRA in Brian's division in the Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research. And very excited about this 2-day workshop. I'll be optimistic here that we'll be here tomorrow. Next slide. So I just really want to talk about what is realism, have some examples, definitions. I always start with definitions. It's actually pretty instructive. Talk about some data trends and operational events and some insights. And to echo Doug's presentation, really talking about some trade-offs we have to make for regulatory decision-making. I fully agree. The PRA is a tool to get to a regulatory decision. That's what it's all about. And then a few concluding thoughts. Next slide. So I always go back to my handy-dandy property of U.S. government Webster's 2 dictionary. I am pretty sure this does not recognize the word text as a verb, so it dates it a little bit. But I like the definition of realism, an inclination towards factual truth and pragmatism. So there's this element of pragmatism that comes into realism. We're in a PRA workshop when we're quoting the PRA policy statement in the first 2 presentations. So a little different part than the previous presentation, but PRA evaluations in support of regulatory decisions should be realistic as practicable. So practicable is an interesting word to me. I first learned it when I worked at a naval shipyard. It has a connotation of, if it can be done, you need to do it. I'll be fair, the NRC doesn't often use it the same way. We tend to mix it with practical and practicable. If you search in the internet, you'll see there's grammar people that give you that distinction, but I think the NRC blurs it. So practicable, practical, similar terms. I think practical carries more of a cost beneficial type of aspect to it. Next slide. So Reg Guide 1200, everyone's familiar with this. Talks about realism in a number of areas. You'll find many hits for realism, realistic, those types of things if you look through the Reg Guide. An accurate representation to the extent practical that reflects expected response to the as-built, as-operated plan. Again, a bunch of keywords and tricky phrases. As-built, as-operated comes up several times, and we talk about realistic fragility, seismic winds, floods, same kind of text is repeated throughout. So a couple more aspects to realism. Next slide. And then the NRC strategic plan. This is something that we update every 5 years. It's probably coming up in the next year or two to be updated. If you look at the current version, use of risk tools to help us make better decisions is throughout that document in all areas of the strategic plan. Not the word realistic, but I think the strategy really hit on some of the things we really look at when we talk about realism. So Operating experience, lessons learned, assessments, technology advances, research activities, and changes in the threat environment were all things that we're supposed to pay attention to. I think this workshop is one of the things that helps the NRC meet the objectives of this particular strategy in the plan. So a bunch of words: pragmatism, practical, practicable, as built, as operated, use of operating experience. I think we're going to touch on all those topics throughout the course of this workshop. So this is really just, pulling some topics off the agenda. I think we've already covered them in the introduction, but I think every topic we've covered is tailored to really focus on areas where we're actively working in trying to be more realistic in our assessments. And benchmarking with external stakeholders is a really valuable feedback mechanism for us as we learn to prioritize and think about things that we may not have missed as we seek to be more realistic in our PRA assessments. Again, as a tool to support regulatory decision making. Next slide. So some data trends. So I like the accident sequence precursor. Chris Hunter and Gary DeMoss in the back here have been vital to this program throughout the years. Chris is probably, I'll say, one of our most experienced risk analysts in the agency. He's been doing the ASK program support for 20 plus years. He'll be presenting later in the workshop. Public website, we have a great dashboard that provides a lot of information about our precursors. So if you go back historically from 1969, 954 precursors. It's a valuable program to help us appreciate what's important in the operating experience. It helps us also bin more risk significant things and get some trends on what's happening with the industry. This really serves as more of a measure of how the NRC is doing. Are we doing the right things from a regulatory standpoint to maintain adequate safety? And so we use it as a measure against ourselves. It's not really the individual plant operating events that are as important as how collectively that program is telling us how we're doing. So the ASK program evaluates two types of events and conditions. The degraded plant conditions, this may be a diesel generator out of service for 30 days. We'll use a delta core damage probability to assess that. And we'll also look at initiating events. So that's a conditional core damage probability for initiating events. Both these measures are actual probabilities. They're not frequencies. So they represent the actual risk associated with that particular operational event. So it's the likelihood of core damage given those particular conditions. Historically, you can see how things have been out. Order of magnitude type of results. We keep this figure updated. And you can see, very few very high events. That I think the top two events were Browns Ferry and Browns Ferry fire and Rancho Seco steam generator dry out way back. So the first two layers of that cake are all 1970s era events. I think there might be one 1985 in there, but we haven't seen that level of risk event for quite a while. So let's look more recently. So the next slide. So these are some trends from, actually go back for a second because I want to underscore something Doug had said. So it's clear to me when I look at this, if you think of when the use of PRA in our decision making really took hold, late 1990s, 2000s, it has been a steady improvement in what we've seen in precursors by year from that time period. And we continue to see that. It's still, precursors are at a fairly low level and continues to be so. And so that's the type of information we get from this. So and the other thing I forgot to mention, precursor, the probability is 1E minus 6 is what we're looking for. There's a little nuance on initiating events where it may actually be a little bit of a higher cutoff depending on the specific plant. But this is the number of events that are greater than 1E minus 6, more or less. And then we also bin them by their actual risk level. So one more slide forward. All right, so some data trends in the last 10 years, which is probably more representative of where we're currently at. So you can see 74, I think, over a 10-year period. Nothing greater than 1E minus 3. We do have two that are in the 1E minus 3 to 1E minus 4 category, and the rest on lower. What's interesting feedback for me when I look at this is what's driving these precursors. And you can see we have a pretty strong contribution from emergency diesel generators, over the last several years. If you look at the actual events, we haven't actually seen 3 years with a number of diesel generator contributing events since 1992. Not a statistically significant trend because we use a very high confidence level on that, but we haven't seen 3 consecutive years with this number of diesel events since for 30 plus years. Just an observation. HPSI failures are also in the mix here too. The other thing that we calculate is called the ASP index, and it's an annualized cumulative plant average of risk from precursors that we track and trend. It's a little difficult at first to get your head around, but basically it's averaging out the total risk from the precursors in a given year across the fleet. So imagine summing up all the precursors and dividing by the number of operating plants in essence. When you plot this out for the last 10 years, here's the trend here. Very, very low number in general, except for 2 years, 2020 and 21. And those are 2 very specific operational events. And the main point here is when we look back at the operational risk profile, it's really driven by the bad day at a particular plant, not the average performance. So the average performance is really important, but the bad day is also really important. So to take a look at those 2 events real quick. So the first one was the Duane Arnold derecho. That was August 2020. That had a CCDP. Both of these are initiating events, by the way, of 80 - 4. So that's pretty high, the highest in the last 10 years. Not a surprise that the dominant sequences involve station blackout. There was a loss of offsite power, obviously. RICSI and HPSI failure of early offsite power recovery. So that didn't actually happen. But if you look at the PRA and you put loss of offsite power in the conditions that happened on that day, those are the sequences that would likely get you to core damage. You can see successive RICSI failure of flex and failure to recover offsite power in the long term. Waterford was Hurricane Ida 2020, again August. That had a CCDP of 5E - 4. And again, no surprise, this didn't actually happen. The plant was fine, it came through it, but the dominant sequences involves failure of on-site EDGs and failure of flex diesels to charge batteries. So going one more slide. So looking a little bit more at Duane Arnold. So the National Weather Service later estimated the wind speeds were near 130 miles per hour. We've had derechos in this area, they're pretty severe storms. But if you look at the LER, nothing beyond the design basis for the facility. So safety-related equipment was designed to handle it, and it responded as designed, and everything was within the design basis tornado wind speed for the site. When you look back at Duane Arnold, and again, I say this, we use ASP for us to learn. There was a surveillance frequency LER, TISTIF 425, and it had an interesting line that Duane Arnold screened out high wind events. And the basis was because they met the SRP criteria, which is a typical screening approach. And we accepted this, by the way. But that SRP criteria is really built on the design basis loadings on structures. So what service level are you going to design your buildings to? What it missed was one of the big contributors to this actual event, which was debris loading on the service water strainers. So the high wind event resulted in a lot of debris generation, and that debris found its way to the service water strainers. They didn't lose EDG cooling during the event, but they did need to bypass one of the strainers to maintain diesel cooling water flow. So that was something that wasn't really represented in the PRA. Maybe it's a predictable outcome of this type of event. So more of a question. They did recover offsite power after 25 hours. I understand that was pretty heroic measures on the part of the licensee to do that. So they really worked hard at getting power back. Next slide. So Waterford, nuclear plant located near New Orleans. So they had a hurricane, 2021 August. Again, not considered a beyond design basis event. All the systems responded as designed during that event. Observed damage coincides with the amount of damage expected for the event. What's a little interesting about this particular site, this isn't, hurricanes are no stranger to Louisiana. Since that plant went online in 1985, they've had to go to the National Weather Service for this, 9 hurricanes, just hurricanes, no tropical storms. These are all just hurricanes within 50 nautical miles of the site. So losses of offsite power from those extreme weather events aren't unusual for the Waterford site. Plant is designed and licensed, operating well within its license. What's interesting about Waterford is it does have what appears to be a higher CCDP for loss of offsite power events than what we see for comparable sites that also can experience hurricane-related loops. There is they call it a PTED generator that's capable of supplying backup power for the diesel generators, but during this event, they didn't need it, but they later found out the starting batteries for that particular diesel were degraded. Believed it could start it, but they had not been fully charged prior to the event. So this really goes to, looking at operating experience, are we learning from it, and what can be done to further ensure that we don't get into risk significant operational events. Next slide. Did we miss one slide? There we go. It's a trade-off. There we go. So a couple other things to mention. So event and condition assessment is one of the key things the NRC uses PRA for. So you find it in the AST program, the SDP. There's an approach you have to use for that. Otherwise, you get 1 or 0 every time you look at an operational event. So we call it the failure memory approach. Observe successes during the event are treated probabilistically. If the diesel started, we don't assume it would start in that assessment. We assign it its nominal probability. So there's still a chance it could have failed when you run it through the PRA model. We look at the failures and we treat them as true failure events. So if the operator failed to do something, that's assumed to be failed. If a piece of equipment didn't start, it's assumed to be failed. If you don't do that, you don't get a meaningful output from the ECA. It's sort of a ground rule for doing the whole assessment. So we find ourselves in a lot of discussions. Well, the diesel ran for 4 hours. Why aren't you crediting the 4-hour runtime? And we don't credit it because that runtime was a success. So we treat it probabilistically. Would it actually happen every time that the diesel would actually run for 4 hours? Sometimes you get into inconsistencies that you may credit the diesel that failed after 4 hours with a higher reliability for that first 4 hours than you would the other diesel that was unaffected. So I think sometimes we run into differences of opinion when we're using this failure memory approach and how we treat successes versus failures. Common cause failure is always a popular discussion item. I will say the alpha factor model we use is not black magic. You can easily convert between the alpha factors we use and multiple Greek letters. It's just a mathematical formula. What it helps us with is aligning our data, aligning the modeling parameters with the data that we actually collect. But the adjustments you make for CCF for an observed failure sometimes are issues. The amount of detail we go into it can be a trade-off. The data becomes very sparse the more you slice and dice it, so there's some balance to how far you want to go with that. Otherwise, you're just letting the Bayesian priors you assign drive your parameter rather than the data itself. Really important in the SDP, timely decision-making using best available information versus the best answer. Again, we're trying to make a regulatory decision for the SDP, putting a color to a finding in one of 4 categories. ASP, I think we have a little more time to try to get a better answer on some of those decisions, but there is a trade-off between the amount of detail you're going to go into and supporting timely decision-making, and we run into that all the time. It's a level 3 PRA project. So, this was a great experience for our staff. We review PRAs. This was a chance for us to actually do PRA. And so as we were getting our staff working on that, we really were pushing, and Alan Kriski's in the back of the room as the lead of that project, really wanted staff not to screen things out too early. Keep it in the model, be inclusive. We don't want to use the word conservative, but if you screen things out too early, you're never going to see them again. So better to keep things in, and then when you see it on the second round, then I can refine it. So again, not conservative, but recognition of the iterative process we use with PRA. And Doug brought up this point very well, the clarity of decision-making criteria versus consideration of uncertainties. The last thoughts? So there's always a trade-off between accuracy and pragmatism. We're trying to do many activities to increase our realism. You can always do more. This workshop is really going to be a valuable feedback mechanism for us to help identify areas where we should be focusing. And that broad stakeholder engagement is really vital to us. And so we appreciate everybody's participation in the workshop and looking forward to 2 days, 2 full days of meetings.
I like your optimism, Kevin. We do have a couple minutes for questions. If anyone here has questions, please raise your hand and I'll run you the microphone. Please let us know who you are and who you're with, if at all possible.
You got to give me a softball, Gary.
Oh, this is an easy one, Kevin. You should be able to solve it tomorrow. But yeah, I'm Gary DeMoss out of PSEG, and appreciate your rundown of the ASP program. That's really interesting. A lot of good OE comes out of that. I noticed you didn't mention the word fire anywhere in the ASP program, yet I think everybody's fire PRA shows a much higher risk than their internal events PRA. Fire PRA dominates our risk-informed decision-making much more than internal events or seismic or the other hazards. Does that concern you that we have a realism problem here?
With how the ASP program?
With the fact, no, I'm not worried about the ASP program. It is what it is. It's just a look back. But are we off base in that we're not seeing operating experience that indicates fire is a risk driver? Again, there's no scientific way to yes, no, we are, or so we're not seeing operating experience risk that would show fire as a driving event. Yet we're making all of our decisions based on fire PRA numbers.
So it's a good question, and you would think that you would see these operational events. So I took a 10-year slice, that 10-year slice eliminated 2013. And if you look back at 2013, you would see an extremely high precursor that you actually were involved with analyzing, which was the Robinson event, which was and I think I can say this, high energy arcing fault, that there were some equipment issues and operator actions, and that ended up the crew inadvertently reignited the fire after the plant was stabilized. So that ended up being a pretty high precursor event. We haven't seen those kind of events in the last 10 years, which is good. The staff has continued to work on trying to improve the realism in fire, and we've got some of our fire folks here who have been involved with that to try to get the modeling better, because that's a continuing process to do. Chris, maybe I can lean on you if you have any thoughts on it.
Chris Hunter, Office of Research. I know we have had this topic. I remember Nathan Sue, former SL, talked about this very thing about the fact of, okay, if we're seeing baseline fire risk this high, typically in the E-5, sometimes even mid or even high E-5 baseline risk, maybe we should be seeing more risk significant events across the fleet. So I think it's an acknowledged thing. And I think there's, the answer is potentially yes. Are we overestimating risk? That's my opinion. I think we're potentially doing that, but to be honest, I don't know what to do about it right now.
And Robinson was 2010, but if the ASP database, the dashboard is pretty good. The HEAF is one of the coded categories, and I think we have 9-ish events in there, and they tend to be pretty significant risk drivers, but they are infrequent.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
Oh, with events like Browns Ferry and Robinson, fire is far from zero. I don't mean to point to zero, no risk or anything like that. That's not my point. I think we just may have a good area to work in realism.
Yeah, that's good feedback. Thank you.
All right, we do have one hand online, so we're going to go to that, and then we'll move to our next speaker. So for Fernando Ferrante, you should be able to unmute and ask your question at this time. Fernando, are you with us? All right, we'll give Fernando a chance to find his mute. Can't unmute. Okay, give me a second. Let me try something else. All right, Fernando, if you could try it again now.
Yeah, I think I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, please.
Okay, yeah, this is Fernando Ferrando with APRI. I really like Kevin's, discussion on the definitions on realism, as well as Doug True's discussion on what we're talking about. And so hopefully this is the softball you were looking for, Kevin. I mean, is the word realism even really the right word to discuss what we're trying to do here? And I mean that in a, in a positive way to say, when we discuss PRA, right, and what's realistic, right, we're really dealing with extreme events. In some cases, we're dealing with data that shows failures that do happen, and so and then there was the earlier comment on is PRA predictable, which I think is a mistaken understanding of what we're trying to do here. And so I wonder if the word realism sometimes gives the wrong impression. I mean, what we're trying to do really is develop a tool that helps us understand as much as we can, all the things that, are out there. And in many cases, we don't have the details, right? The whole discussion on uncertainty. And so, we've used technical adequacy before. And again, this is hopefully a softball question on how do we communicate, particularly to a public, right, that may not be aware of the details. What is it that we're really trying to accomplish, right? And again, to Gary's point on fire, right? I mean, there are things in the PRA that are not realistic, right? And that's okay because we assume, say, something has failed and the risk is still low. We know it's probably lower than that. And so it's not really realistic, but it doesn't impact the decision. And so I'm not against the word realism. I'm just kind of asking your thoughts on how do we communicate what we're trying to do, the improvement on the tools we're trying to do in a way that maybe doesn't send the wrong message is kind of my question.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I agree with you completely. I think we use the word realism frequently to mean we're moving away from conservatism. We're trying not to be overly conservative, and we're trying to be more accurate, more reflective of operating experience, more reflective of data. So I think that's the first context, but I honestly really like the definition in my ancient Webster's 2 U.S. Government Property Dictionary, because it distinctly brought out the pragmatism in it. And so I do think every piece of information we look for, and we see this all the time in everything we do here, and I'm sure the industry has the same issue of every piece of information comes with a cost. If you want to run something down, it's going to take you time, it's going to take you information. Maybe you have to do a research project, maybe you have to go search for the information, do experiments. So information always comes with a cost, and you really, I think for us, the challenge is how do I balance that cost with the regulatory decision I need to make? And sometimes that regulatory decision can be relatively coarse, SDP type binning, maybe a license amendment decision, whether I'm going to approve or not approve. And if there's tons of margin, is that information really worth the cost to run it down? And so I do like kind of combining it with accuracy and the pragmatism or the practicality of running down the information, because ultimately, to me, it's not necessarily the risk number we're looking for, it's the decision that we're going to make at the end of the day that's most important. And so what's the influence on that decision?
100% agree. Thank you, Kevin.
All right, we do have one more hand. Ed, come on. All right, come on, guys. You can't keep throwing hands at me. Ed Lyman, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, hi, it's Ed Lyman from Unit of Concerned Scientists. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so the value for the Duane Arnold derecho CCDP you quoted, I believe, incorporated a low probability of flex unavailability. And so could you comment on the impact of the assumptions of the flex strategies and driving that number down, and also in the context that there was some damage to the flex storage building, and if there were, let's say, a sensitivity study done of that event with a slightly higher wind speed, how that might have impacted the overall CCDP. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. Chris Hunter just stood up in the room and has the microphone, so he'll address that.
Chris Hunter, Office of Research. Yes, I was the lead analyst on that ASP analysis. A couple things. I mean, I think for both Dwayne Arnold and Waterford, the fact is Flex significantly lowered the risk of those events. If those events, same events would have occurred pre-Flex, both would have been significant precursors. So just off that. When it came to the actual Flex data, so at the time, the SPAR models, we've added Flex, but it was understanding of a lot of these, we had placeholder data values. And at the time, they were using the same templates as the safety-related diesels. So we knew that the reliability, at least based on initial look from the data, that the reliability of Flex diesel generators was not the same as the safety-related diesels. However, we did not have the updated PW owners group Flex data. So what we did is we used a multiplier and we ran sensitivities on that. And I believed I used, for the best estimate, I think it was a 5 times multiplier, basically saying that the Flex diesels were 5 times less reliable than the safety-related diesels. And that's what I used for the analysis. And I did note that as a key modeling uncertainty and perform sensitivity analysis. And I think, if my memory serves, and that's in the ASP report, which is publicly available that you can look up. I would say, I think the reliabilities would have to be an order of magnitude higher for it to cross into the significant precursor threshold. And I think the final question was, yes, there was some damage to one of the Flex buildings. I believe Dwayne Arnold had 2 Flex buildings. I think it was their north building had damage. However, it did not affect any equipment. And we only credited the N train. So basically, we did not credit the redundant Flex train in that. So we didn't think any sensitivity or analysis was warranted for that. So hopefully I answered all your questions. Thanks.
All right, I did have one more hand pop up, and this is the last question we're taking because we need to move on from this. Jeff Mittman. Jeff, you should be able to unmute and ask your question at this time. Jeff, are you with us? All right, let me try one more thing. Jeff, can you unmute? Jeff, if you're there, you should be able to. There you are.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. Please proceed.
Yes. So Jeff Mittman, I'm a retired senior risk analyst with the NRC. I think it's for the 4th time now the industry has proposed that the NRC do away with the SPAR models and allow the industry to do all the risk analysis, and the NRC would review those results. Kevin, could you talk to where the NRC is in the thought process or the decision-making process regarding that proposed proposal by the industry?
So Jeff, I can't talk about where management is. Brian, are you willing to take it? I could give you personal views on my thoughts on the SPAR models, but let me hand it over to Brian.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. This is Brian Smith, Office of Research. So at this point in time, we do plan to continue utilization of the SPAR models. They're key to a lot of the activities that we do. We talked about them already earlier today, both in licensing and in oversight, and we'll continue to utilize them and update the models as the budgets allow.
Thank you.
So Jeff, just one thought on the SPAR models that I'll add, non-controversial. I think the S way back in the day was simplified. It's not anymore. It's standardized plan analysis risk models, and I know Jeff, you're very familiar with the models. The key for us is the standardized format, naming conventions, the way fault trees and event trees are labeled, the familiarity with the Sapphire Code, which was developed specifically to support ECA analysis. It has capabilities that CAFTA lacks. So that efficiency we get for our risk analysts and being able to use the models and switch from Calvert Cliffs to DC Cook to Dwayne Arnold if you need to, all pretty efficiently is really what we get out of the SPAR models. It makes our risk assessment process very efficient from that perspective. But I just want to put a plug in, the S is standardized, and that's really important to us when we're dealing with, 90 plus plants that we have to provide oversight for.
All right, thanks, Kevin. I'd like to turn things over to Michelle Gonzalez for our next talk. Michelle, please let us know who you are and what your role is here.
So good morning, everyone. I am Michelle Gonzalez. I am a risk and reliability engineer from the Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research, and I am the lead or I'm the person in charge of maintenance and development of SPAR models at the NRC. So with this presentation, I'm gonna just provide a high-level overview of the activities that we're doing to keep our models representing the as-built, as-operated in order to have more realistic models. Next slide. So I think Kevin just took some of these already, but yeah, let me just start with SPAR. What SPAR stands for Standardized Plant Analysis Risk Model, which means that the SPAR models use the same modeling conventions, naming conventions, the same, I guess, the same way of modeling fault trees, which makes it easier for risk analysts if they open a different plan that they're not used to, a PWR, they can easily understand and run the models with no problems or no issues. This standardization supports the efficient use of all models, as I just said. It makes it much easier for people that are not familiar with other auto models or other plans. One thing is that SPAR includes detailed modeling for important areas like common cause failure, loss of offsite power, recovery. And even though that the models are meant to be independent, whenever we do an update of the model, we complete a benchmark against the licensee model. And whenever there is a big difference between the results, INL in this case, which is the ones that are in charge of developing the models, they'll look at those differences and make sure and try to identify why the difference, and then they'll make the necessary changes to make it more consistent or appropriate as with the licensee model. So for SPAR models, we use Sapphire. Sapphire is the code that we use to run the SPAR model. It has a simple interface that allows for straightforward calculations for events assessment like SDP and ASP analysis. It has different workspaces that allows for calculations like for delta CDF or CCDP. So there's a couple of workspaces between with Sapphire, including the ECA workspace, which is pretty much you choose the initiating event and you can choose those areas, those all the conditions, anything that was affected by that initiating event, you choose it, and then you run the model, and you can get your delta CCDP or the delta CDF. So Sapphire has a broad user base. Right now, I know NASA is using Sapphire to develop their PRA models. We've had requests from other aerospace companies. The University of Maryland is using Sapphire also for their PRA projects. So it is, I guess, growing a little bit in use outside of the NRC. Next slide, please. So where we are at now, for operating reactors, we have 69 full power internal events model representing the operating plants. All the models have all hazard modelings, and when I say all hazard, all models have seismic, at least seismic models, and then additionally some have internal fire, internal flooding, and winds. So we have 8 shutdown models and, excuse me, 2 level 2 models. For new reactors, we've developed a few, starting from ABWR, APWR, and US EPR that were built like over 10 years ago. We developed an AP1000 all hazard model, and this was, we call it a generic model. This was, I guess, the model that is more complete or has been further developed. It has seismic, internal flooding, internal fire, low power shutdown, and level 2. With this model, this was the starting point to develop the Vogel 3 and 4 model. We started with that, and then we added and incorporated the plant-specific information into the model. We recently completed a model for the NuScale design. This was completed in the past year, and now we are in the process of developing a model for the BWRX 300 design. Next slide, please. So what have we done recently? First off, in 2023, summer 2023, the NRC updated all models to incorporate the flex data from the PWR Owners Group report that was completed 2 years ago. So we consistently update our models. We have our main, I guess our main task is the routine model updates. We were able to complete 10 models that were benchmarked against the licensed PRA in FY24. And for this year, we've completed 12 models. This is not the only activities that we do to maintain and update our models. Whenever SRAs, the senior reactor analysts, are running their SDPs or their analysis, if they have any issues, if they have any problems, they'll reach out to INL, and INL will help figure out the issue with the model, and then they will do slight changes and update the model of records. So that's something, if I were to put a number, it's at least hundreds of minor updates to the model each year. In recent, I think in a recent, maybe a couple of years ago, we developed a SPAR Dash, which is an interactive display of PRA results for operating plans that's based on the standard, on the SPAR model. So this is a tool that makes it easier for inspectors just to, it's like a plug and play. They can look at all the information for all operating plans and get the specific information, system information, data, or that they need for to complete their jobs. Next slide, please. Just to provide an overview on what we've done with seismic modeling. I know that there's going to be another, I think there's another presentation later that talks about seismic, but so all SPAR models, like I mentioned before, they include seismic modeling. They use site-specific hazard curves, and the majority of the models utilize surrogate fragilities. In this year, Diablo Canyon and Columbia were updated to increase the bins or expand the bins from 5 to 6 bins. Next slide, please. For internal floods, we've been updating. We've done some updates to St. Lucie Unit 1 and Unit 2 were completed in the past 2 years, and then Sharon Harris was updated this year. Next slide. For internal fires, we have 22 total internal fire models. We're trying to increase that number. The goal is to have all models having internal fire modeling. So we've done St. Lucie Unit 2, Vogel, and Cooper this year. And then we did Brunswick and St. Lucie the previous years. So we're trying, for now, we're doing 3 models a year for internal fire. We're looking into, like I said, increasing, hopefully using additional tools, doing some of the modeling in-house, or there's been some talk of the possibility of using some AI tools in order for us to be able to increase that number of models that we can do a year. With Sapphire, we are continuously updating Sapphire. We're using version 8, which is continuously being updated. And INL is developing a new cloud-based Sapphire that's scheduled to be released August of 2026. Some of the recent updates or recent advances in the Sapphire tool is that it has moved to a more modern and user-friendly format. I mean, the database. Same for the programming interface, making it easier for users to use the tool and apply it. So looking ahead, what are our plans? I mentioned this before. There has been talks about using some AI for advancing or helping with some of the processes of updating the models. This is to be determined. Hopefully we can do this in the future. We plan to continue routine SPAR model update efforts to represent the as-built, as-operated. Hopefully we can continue with the process of updating the fire models to approximately 3 a year. And this is all budget depending on the budget allowances that we have for next year. Sapphire 9 will be released next year, and then we plan on continuing the development of new and advanced reactors as they come in with new designs. We plan to continue developing and moving forward with that. Next slide. And I think that's going to be it. If you have any questions, I'll open it for questions and discussion.
All right, we do have a couple minutes for questions. If anyone has a question here in the room, please flag me down. I'll run you a microphone. If you have a question online, please raise your hand. All right, looks like we have a question online. Ed Lyman. Ed, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. It's Ed Lyman from UCS. So I see that you didn't have any of the non-light water reactor designs currently scheduled for SPAR model development, but the agency is reviewing 2 of them, 2 construction permit applications that rely on the LNP. And so does this mean that the NRC currently does not have any independent capability to confirm the applicant's PRA, the information that's supplying to support that LNP-based approach for the construction permits? Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jonathan Evans. I'm the branch chief of the probabilistic risk assessment branch. So thanks for the question, Ed. So right now, currently, what we are doing is the non-light water reactors are currently going through the review process. There is some conversations and looking at how to appropriately capture risk for risk insights and risk information to support licensing efforts right now, and those are currently ongoing.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our next speaker, Alan Kurtzky. Alan, you want to use microphone or seat?
Thank you. Okay, I'm Alan Koritsky, Office of Research. I'm also the lead for the Level 3 PRA project. As some of you may know, this project has been going on for quite a while now. I'm happy to report that we're getting finally near the end. All the technical work has been completed. We've issued it, all that work is documented in 21 reports that have been submitted for public review and comment, and they're in various stages of being finalized. The only significant task left to do is complete the summary report for the project, and that's ongoing right now. What we want to take advantage of today is for this workshop, if you can just go to the next slide, is as part of doing this work, the Level 3 PRA project is intended to be a state of practice study. However, we recognize that because it's such a large scope to the project, there were certain areas that might require additional work where we had to push the envelope in the state of practice. So I wanted to mention today some of the areas that we had to advance, make advancements in the state of practice, as well as also bring up a couple of insights or results that I thought might be interesting to the audience. So I think I have about 8 minutes and 8 bullets, so we'll see how quickly I can get through them. The first thing that we came across of interest was interfacing system locus. We had some very sparse data that we found that related to the potential for common cause failure where you would have internal leakage through an isolation valve. And so as you're aware, usually for IS-LOCA pathways, you'll have at least a couple valves in series. And if you could have common cause failure leakage through those 2 valves, internal leakage, then you could potentially get an IS-LOCA situation. Using that data, and when I say using, we had to torture it tremendously to get it to apply for this purpose. We came up with IS-LOCA core damage frequencies that were extremely high relative to other similar studies. So at the time, we were just, the staff was completing their draft guidance for expert elicitation. So we decided to pilot that approach and panel an expert or put together an expert panel to come up and analyze this issue and see if we could get a better understanding of the uncertainties and better results. So we did that, and the results of that expert elicitation, once they were fed back into the model, the results that we came up in terms of core damage frequency from IS-LOCAs was pretty much in line with other studies such as IPEs and New Reg 1150, et cetera. So it was a good exercise for the NRC guidance, and it gave us confidence that the numbers we were coming with now were reasonable. Another issue that we came upon was what we refer to as the safe and stable end state issue. And that is where, just to get some definitions, Kevin loves definitions. Here's some definitions for you. So safe in our definition means you do not have core damage. And generally with a level 1 PRA, we're looking at 24-hour mission time. So we don't have core damage at 24 hours. There's some scenarios will be modeled longer, but generally 24 hours. And so at 24 hours, you don't have core damage. We say that's safe. However, if there's still an ongoing situation that would lead to potentially core damage sometime after 24 hours, then we consider that not to be stable. So in this particular case, we were talking about, and this is the reference plant for the study was a Westinghouse plant. And so we had used the WOG 2000 RCP seal LOCA model. And if you don't have any seal failures, but you lose cooling, you can have the assumption is you have a 21 GPM leak per RCP. There's 4 loops, 81 GPM. And with an 84 GPM LOCA, we don't have core damage at 24 hours, but if we keep going, we'll eventually get core damage, not too much longer after that. So in those cases, what we did was we extended the analysis for 72 hours, and we considered additional mitigative actions. And then the additional mitigative actions like refilling the condensate storage tank or using alternate charging alignments or depressurizing steam generators manually. If any of these additional functions were able to mitigate and stop the sequence, it was okay. If not, then we would have core damage. We went and applied that for all the entries in the model, and then did a sensitivity study to determine what was the impact of this additional modeling. And it really made no difference. These additional sequences, very insignificant contributors to core damage. Another area that was beneficial both for the staff and the industry is we were able to use the project to pilot the trial use ASME ANS level 2 and level 3 PRA standards. And in doing that process, we learned a lot of good information about our models. And I believe the industry got to take back some interesting lessons learned to help improve the standards. One area where we definitely had to push the envelope was in post-core damage HRA, human reliability analysis. Most HRA methods that are used are focused primarily on level 1 a PRA, and therefore you're looking at things that are directed by, for instance, emergency operating procedures or abnormal occurrence procedures, very specific as to what the operator is supposed to do, a very particular action. When you go to level 2 PRA space, post-core damage, now you're focusing on things like severe accident management guidelines, maybe the extensive damage mitigation guidelines. And there, the operator doesn't have one specific thing he's told to do. The operator or the decision makers, maybe someone from the TSC, the Technical Support Center, are presented with a menu of options. And there's no one specific thing that's directed they need to do. And many of the options are going to have the potential to have negative impacts as well as positive impacts. So it's a whole different paradigm in terms of HRA. And so we developed an approach, and we implemented that approach for looking at post-core damage operator actions. We don't claim it's the end-all and be-all of level 2 HRA, but it served our purposes, and it represents, I think, a good starting point if the technical community, either the PRA or HRA technical community, wants to pursue this area. There's something they can build on that we've done for this project. Another issue we ran into is how long to run the severe accident analysis in level 2 PRA. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, in level 1 PRA, there's kind of an understood mission time of 24 hours after initiation that you run the analysis for. And again, for some scenarios, you might run a little bit longer, steam jet tube ruptures, et cetera. In the level 2 space, there isn't really any guidance as to how long you should run the analysis. And when I talk about running the analysis, in our case, I'm talking, let's say, MELCOR, running the MELCOR analysis. In industry, you would use the map code to run the analysis. So we picked a mission time of 7 days after accident initiation, because we wanted to get a very good understanding of the severe accident progression, particularly in the longer time frame, how things were going, as well as the characterization of the source terms. But we also recognize that when you run MELCOR out for 7 days, the level of uncertainty in those calculations it becomes much more uncertain. You become more speculative. Also, in that level 2 HRA I was mentioning, we were crediting actions right about the time of vessel breach and maybe one additional action right after vessel breach. So we were not really crediting actions further in that later time frame. So we felt that we wanted to do a couple sensitivity analyses to see what if we stop the analysis at a shorter point, what would be the impact on the risk results. So we did 2 sensitivity analyses that were pegged to entry into the severe accident management guidelines, the SAMGs. One was we stopped the analysis at 36 hours after SAMG entry, and another one we stopped it at 60 hours after SAMG entry. And what those analyses showed us was that when we ran it to 7 days, over 60% of the core damage frequency ultimately led to a large release. But if we stop the analysis at 36 hours after SAMG entry, less than 20% of core damage frequency led to a large release. So the big 2 takeaways, as far as I'm concerned from that, are: 1, if credible mitigation actions can be taken in those first 2 or 3 days after accident initiation, you can prevent a large release. Like, for instance, if you can do containment venting to prevent overpressurization, you can prevent a large release. The flip side of the coin, however, is if you do a severe accident analysis or level 2 PRA and you only model it out for 2 or 3 days after accident initiation, you might be greatly underestimating what the risk is, because there may be scenarios where you are going to get a big release that you haven't accounted for. Another area in level 2 modeling that we differ a little bit in what other PRAs have done, or what many PRAs have done, level 2 PRAs, is in the modeling of combustion. Many PRAs treat combustion and containment deterministically. In other words, they make an assumption about what combustible gas concentration you would have ignition at. And therefore, once you get to that level of concentration, it's assumed you will automatically ignite it, and you'll have a combustion at that point. We treated that issue stochastically. In other words, we sample the timing of combustion across the whole severe accident progression. And what that does is that allows for a greater range of combustible gas concentrations before you have combustion. Doesn't mean the probabilities of these things are high, but there is some probability that you could have combustion at much higher levels of combustible gas concentration. And so therefore, actually what we saw in our results was that one of the significant risk contributing release categories in our level 2 PRA was a combustion event in the intermediate time frame, mean after vessel breach, but before long term. And so definitely treating that issue stochastically had a significant difference between if we treated it deterministically. Again, because this was a full scope PRA, the level 3 project looked at all radiological sources on site. We looked at all plant operating states. We looked at all hazards. So that gave us the opportunity to get some insights that you wouldn't get necessarily from looking at a single unit PRA. One of the things that we learned from this study is we got a better handle on the total contribution to reactor risk from considering all hazards, internal fires, seismic events, high winds, et cetera. So we get a much better feel for that. Another thing that we got out of the study was we got a better understanding of the relative risk contributions from the different radiological sources on site, the reactors versus the spent fuel pools versus dry cask storage. And as anybody who's looked at any of the public reports that we've released so far, you'll see that the reactor risk is much higher than the spent fuel pool risk, and the spent fuel pool risk is much higher than the dry cask storage risk. The other thing is while we couldn't do a complete analysis, we did a pilot application of an approach for looking at multi-unit risk and multi-source risk, multi-source being reactors, spent fuel pool, dry cask storage, et cetera. And what we saw there, even though it wasn't a complete analysis, we got enough information to be relatively confident that the risk from an accident, not total site risk, but the risk from an accident that impacts a single reactor is much greater than the risk from an accident that would impact both reactors on site. Consequences worse in the 2-reactor accident, but the likelihood of it occurring is so much lower that the overall risk is smaller. It's a smaller contributor to total site risk. By the same token, we saw that the contribution to total site risk from an accident that impacts both reactor units is significantly higher than the risk contribution from an accident that would impact both reactor units and the spent fuel pools. Again, with the spent fuel pools and all that extra fuel, you have a much greater potential release, but the frequency of such an accident is so much lower that the actual contribution to the total site risk is lower. So those are some of the insights that we got from looking at the whole spectrum of sources on the site. The last thing I just want to mention, and Kevin alluded to this earlier in his presentation too, one of the main objectives of the project, is the NRC endeavors to become a modern risk-informed regulator. We can't review risk-informed submittals if we don't have the capabilities in-house. And so this project really focused on getting as much of the staff experience with PRA as possible. We had dozens and dozens of staff work on this project, many of them doing actual PRA modeling, others doing supported analyses that support PRAs. And so we really have come out of this project with a much stronger set of PRA capabilities for the staff than when we started. And that's pretty much all I have for today.
All right, we have time for maybe one quick question. If anyone has a question, again, if you've got a question in the room, raise your hand. I'll run a microphone to you. It looks like we have one online. Carl Granton. Carl, you should be able to unmute and ask your question. Carl, are you with us? All right, give me a second. All right, Carl, why don't you give that a shot? If you could unmute and ask your question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Yeah, just one real quick question. This is Rick Grantham of CRG. Did you see anything in your level 2 and level 3 efforts there that would have an impact on the ASME ANS PRA standards? Would there be any feedback on that?
Well, I think now I can't remember, Rick, if you were part of the panel when we had when we were doing the level 2 and level 3 PRAs for internal events. The PWR owners group had sponsored and led peer reviews using the standard for this, and that's what I was referring to earlier. And I can't remember if you were on that panel or not, but there was.
I was not.
You're not, okay. So there was a lot of back and forth where again we got a lot of good information from the experts that the PWR owners group brought to that panel, that peer review panel, and I think that yes, the standards group took back quite a few things to help improve the standards at that time. I think that input has I believe it's been accounted for now in the current standards.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, sorry, we're going to have to move on. We're starting to run a little bit behind. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, who is Steve Elfrink. Steve, I believe you're with us virtually.
Yes, that's correct. Can you hear me?
We can. You could stand to speak up a little bit.
Okay, I'll try to speak a little louder. So good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Elfrink. I am a reliability and risk analyst in NRR Division of Risk Assessment, and I'll be talking today on modeling of digital INC systems. Next slide. So this presentation is intended to be a high-level overview, and there's really two areas where there's an intersection between PRA realism and digital INC. And those are licensing and then post-installation activities. Next slide. To provide some background, in May 2023, the Commission issued SRM SECI 2276, and this is important because it's the first time where they expanded the policy for digital INC common cause failures to allow risk-informed approaches. A year later, in May 2024, the staff issued BTP 719 Revision 9, which provides the staff with review guidance for reviewing a risk-informed defense in depth and diversity assessment, which we often call a D3 assessment. Next slide. Thank you. So this slide was one of the slides we presented to the ACRS, and I just want to highlight some portions of this because this was a way to visualize the way we intended to review a risk-informed D3 assessment. And I really just want to highlight those two blue boxes on the right. So if an applicant comes in trying to address a common cause failure using a risk-informed approach, there are two primary activities that relate to PRA realism. Those are modeling the CCF in the PRA and determining the risk significance of the CCF. Next slide, please. So this slide captures or summarizes the review guidance that the staff has when we review how an applicant would model the common cause failure in the PRA. And as you expect, we'd have to determine if the base PRA meets the acceptability guidance, but then we also need to evaluate how that common cause failure is modeled in the PRA and justification that that modeling adequately captures the impact of the common cause failure on the plant. In the review guidance, we highlighted a couple of different options for modeling common cause failure, one of which is the detailed modeling of the INC system, or the potential use of surrogate events. So that detailed modeling, that would be one area where PRA realism could come into play, would be to develop techniques for improving the modeling of the INC systems in our PRA. Next slide, please. Okay, so next we want to talk about determining the risk significance of the CCF. And so that was that other part of the review that we need to do. In our review guidance, we talk about trying to figure out what the change in risk would be, and we do that using either a bounding or a conservative sensitivity analysis. We define a bounding sensitivity analysis to be one where an applicant would assume the CCF occurs. So they're going to assume a likelihood of 1.0. And a conservative sensitivity analysis would essentially be a sensitivity analysis that uses some other number that would be less than 1, but it would also have to address the impact of that assumption on the PRA uncertainty. Next slide. And how that all ties together is you see the figure on the right. So then the applicant would look at the change in risk. And once again, this is just the delta CDF for that sensitivity analysis. And then based on the change in risk, that would determine the level of review or the level of justification that they would have if they were proposing something other than the reverse actuation system. Next slide. Now keep in mind, once the Commission issued SRM SECI 2276, that provided an option for applicants to use a risk-informed approach, but not a requirement. And so those considerations I just discussed, those are voluntary. One of the implications after a modification be installed would be the post-installation timeframe. And there's two areas that are important to consider here. Those are PRA configuration control, which is all about maintaining or upgrading the PRA to be consistent with the as-built, as-operated plant. And then the underlying data analysis, which is about estimating the parameters that are used to determine the likelihood of the digital INC CCF occurring. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this slide just kind of captures how we were envisioning the likelihood of the digital INC CCFs and really just breaking it down between the licensing aspect and the post-installation aspect. When we're talking about licensing, that would be if you're looking at risk-informed D3 assessment. Initially, we'd be looking at either using a bounding or a conservative value. And then post-installation, that gets back to the, I just talked about the PRA configuration control, where PRA has to be updated to be consistent with the as-built, as-operated plant. And then ultimately, the goal is to have a representative or more realistic value to include in the PRA model. Next slide. And this slide just kind of summarizes that and just notes where we're at now. So at the moment, best available information would likely have an applicant using a bounding D3 assessment, but longer term, we'd be looking at the conservative D3 assessment, so those conservative values. And then to the right, that's just a way to summarize where we're at for post-installation. So right now, licensee might consider the likelihood to be a source of uncertainty. They would determine if it was a key uncertainty or not. Longer term, we'd like to be able to incorporate failure data or expert elicitation to estimate an order of magnitude for the likelihood of the CCF. And then even longer term, we'd like to be able to incorporate failure data to determine and align on a more realistic value. Next slide. Now that ties into some of the activities we've been working with the Office of Research on. So enter our requested research to identify two things. And so our research assistance request you see at the top. One was a threshold value above which the probability of occurrence for the common cause failure could be considered bounding. And the second would be to identify any attributes that can be used to reasonably determine if a proposed likelihood of occurrence for the digital INC CCF is bounding. For that first task, research was unable to recommend a bounding value other than 1.0. They did note that there were some other lower values postulated by researchers, but none of them had the pedigree necessary for us to use in regulatory applications. For the second task, research coordinated with INL, who issued the report INL RPT 2482553. And this does two things. So first, it provides a foundation for incorporating the digital INC failure data into the Integrated Data Collection and Coding System, or IDCCS, and the Reliability and Availability Data System, or RADS. And it also proposes recommendations for modeling the digital INC reliability and common cause failures. Next slide. So where are we at currently? In terms of our next steps, the staff is working to publish the INL report as a new reg report. A little bit longer term, we'd like to revise IDCCS database to add the digital INC failure events, and then also update RADS to estimate the digital INC component reliability. And then even longer term, we'd like to include the digital INC systems in SPAR models. Next slide. And this slide just kind of captures, what can you do to help? How can the industry help improve PRA realism for digital INC? When it comes to modeling, improve techniques for modeling the digital INC system, modeling the digital INC CCFs themselves, but in particular the data. If there's any data that you can share, operating experience on digital INC failures or common cause failures, and then if an LER has to be submitted to include some additional information on digital INC failures in the LERs. Next slide. So this is just looks like there's a mistake in the slides, but alternate version of the previous one. So you can continue to the next one. Any questions?
All right, so questions for Steve involving modeling of digital INC systems. Again, if you're in the room, raise your hand and I will run you a microphone. If you are online, raise your hand. We have time for maybe one or two questions and then we're taking a break. So, okay. Yep, here we go. All right, Michael Keegan.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Please proceed with your question.
Thank you very much. Michael Keegan with Don't Waste Michigan. Again, I've been trained in statistics and analysis. I'm hearing a lot of computer modeling, and I've seen in the past where you've gone through maybe 20 different programs to get the answer you want. it amounts to jury shopping. At the end of the day, it's garbage in, garbage out, GIGO, and not to bias NRC. That's just the nature of the beast for everybody. Have you gone through a validation and verification process with these computer programs that you're relying on? Thank you.
For that one, I'll defer to Michelle because that would deal with the V&V for the Sapphire program and SPAR models.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi. So yes, INL, when they develop the models and the Sapphire, it goes to an extensive process of QA and validation and verification for both the code itself, and the models are also following the PRA standard requirements, are built following the PRA standard requirements.
Is that made public? Are those, is that V&V made public?
Yes, this is Kevin Coyne spoke earlier. So to just emphasize what Michelle was saying, the NRC has a software V&V program that we implement on all our computer codes that are developed by the NRC. So Sapphire was within the scope of that program. I'd have to double check. I think it's NUREG CR 7039 is the Sapphire NUREG. It's a little dated because we continue to improve the code, but it may have a volume that describes some of the QA activities that goes into that. But we have a NUREG BR we follow for our software, not just the PRA code, but also our thermohydraulic codes, such as Melcor has a similar QA program and V&V effort that underpins it. So we try to follow the state of practice in making sure those codes provide reasonable results.
And how many different computer programs have been submitted to V&V which did not pass muster?
I don't think we have the answer to that question.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. We have time for one more question. David Bidwell. David, you should be able to unmute and ask your question at this time.
Hi, this is Dave Bidwell from Jensen Hughes. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
All right. My question is, there's a lot of industry data out there and other like processing facilities and stuff that use digital INC for their safety systems. And those PLCs, for example, are going to be used in future US plants to design digital INC systems. My question is there going to be an effort to use the data and the experience out there to develop some sort of a prior or a bounding number rather than default to a 1.0 assumption for common cause when there is a plethora of data out there in the other industries for a similar component used in a safety system? Thank you.
So this is Stephen Alford. So what I can say is, yes, we'd like to move away from using it at 1.0 into using some other more realistic values. If John Lane's available, he may be able to talk about the way we incorporate operating experience and the plans for that, for digital INC specifically. Not sure if John is available right now, if he's in the room.
I'm guessing this is John coming to the microphone.
Yes, hi, I'm John Lane, a senior reliability and risk engineer. When we surveyed industry, we weren't able to actually discover any kind of a quantitative assessment for common cause failure values. And so I think going forward, we are going to have to probably look at in some non-nuclear industry subpart components, because I don't think we're going to have enough with the nuclear industry itself. So we'll probably end up going beyond the nuclear industry to look for some other values. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We're running a little behind schedule because of the discussion, but that's fine. So I've got 10 o'clock. Let's plan on starting around 10:10. 11:10, sorry. I'm on Central Time. I don't know why. All right, see you in 10 minutes.
PRAs over the year. Started in 2005 with new regs, the publication of new reg 6850, and there have been many advancements to that methodology of we've moved through the process of increasing the realism. We're going to be kind of doing this presentation today as a group. We have members of my fire PRA or the fire PRA staff at the NRC, as well as EPRI, going to be presenting during this session. We work very closely with EPRI under the Memorandum of Understanding to do collaborative research. We've seen great success in working collaboratively with the industry and the industry partners to advance the methodology as we move forward and try and make the fire PRAs better. Next slide. Good. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the previous MOU realism work that has been done and some of the main projects that we're currently working on, such as the bulk cable tray ignition project, a lithium-ion battery project, co-located hydrogen facilities, as well as an effort to consolidate some of these methodologies to better capture the bulk of the work that we have conducted. Little technical difficulty, and I'm going to try and keep this as quick as possible because I do not have the optimism that Kevin shares, and we may be squeezing things in a single day. Might not be here tomorrow. Catching up. The next slide that is going to be shown on the screen is Brian discussed briefly a previous effort that had been done in the fire PRA realism space. We held a workshop in 2017 so that we could identify where we could realize them or where there were some conservatisms, what the industry saw as areas where research was needed to improve the methodologies. And you're seeing a laundry list here on the screen of all different areas of research where realism was pushed forward. So these interactions that we hold with the industry, as well as EPRI, NEI, and the industry partners to help identify where these conservatisms are seen through the practitioner and putting these PRAs into practice is very important. It helps us focus our research. It helps us focus where we can get the most bang for our buck in improving these methodologies. And we've discussed a lot about how PRAs are a reflection of the state of knowledge. I like to think of it as well as, are these PRAs mature enough in order to make these decisions? Do I have enough reliability and belief in the results of the PRA to actually make a physical change at the plant? Because if the tool is not good enough to actually make physical changes and believe the risk, we're not going to be able to actually use it on site. I'm not going to go through these in detail. All of the work has been completed for the realism efforts that were identified in 2017, and we'd like to continue this interaction with the industry and keep pushing the methodology forward. Next slide. One of the more recent projects that we're working on with EPRI is for improvements for modeling bulk cable tray ignition. There have been multiple methodologies presented for the actual physical modeling of bulk cable tray ignition, and some of the important parameters there are at what temperature do these cable trays catch on fire when they experience an electrical enclosure or fire underneath them, as well as the timing of how quickly the fire progresses from inside of the cabinet to outside of the cabinet. It can have a significant risk impact to the plant because the cables are significant targets in terms of the fire PRA. What you're seeing on the screen here in the center picture was an apparatus we developed to understand how different penetration styles on the top of an electrical enclosure can influence the ability of a fire to progress from inside the enclosure and run up the cable tray or the cables themselves into the cable tray, potentially leading to full-scale involvement and burning of a cable tray. Different parameters were tested in terms of the penetration material, the number of cables, the cable loading, as well as the cable material. all of the data that was developed during this test series is going to be used to develop a methodology for the PRA with EPRI under that MOU, and EPRI is going to discuss that project, the methodology portion of that a little bit in their following presentation. Again, this is these types of projects are being led by the need. Right now, we see the large risk driver from the electrical enclosures themselves. We've gotten a lot better at modeling how the fire progresses in those electrical enclosures and what the impact to the plant is if it does get out of that enclosure. Next slide.
Good morning, Kenny Hamburger, Fire Protection Engineer in the Office of Research. We are currently embarking on a joint NRC EPRI project to characterize lithium-ion battery fires in nuclear power plants. The existing fire PRA methods neglect lithium-ion batteries. They're not addressed at all. And to the extent that they are addressed, they're typically considered transients. And these are energy sources that have heat release rates and failure mechanisms that are markedly different than your standard conventional transient nuclear power plants. We're finding more and more of these batteries in power plants, typically in small power tools, uninterruptible power supplies, what we would call small or even medium scale battery installations. And what we're looking to do is develop a quantitative methodology for addressing lithium-ion battery fires in the plants, including frequency, identifying the elements that affect the heat release rate, so failure mechanism, size, state of charge, et cetera, and then developing heat release rate distributions so they can be modeled in fire PRAs. I will just add, I don't see it on the slide here, but I will add that EPRI has a draft white paper that they are working through on lithium-ion batteries. It's more of a quantitative analysis, looks at existing data on lithium-ion battery fires, general things to be aware of when bringing lithium-ion batteries into the plants, and you can look forward to that in the next couple months. Oh, there it is. So I talked about EPRI's white paper, and phase 2 is going to be the experimental aspect of the program here. We're going to use the literature that is currently out there, as well as some test data that we developed from physical testing at the National Institute of Standards and Technology to develop those heat release rate profiles. And then we'll develop the methodology with the supporting data.
Morning, my name's Gabe Taylor. I'm also a fire protection engineer in the Office of Research. Speak briefly today on the co-located hydrogen risk framework that we're developing. There has been interest to use nuclear steam and electricity to produce hydrogen via electrolysis process, whether it's low or high temperature. And what we are attempting to do with this project, again, working with EPRI, is develop a framework where we can assess the hazard to the nuclear power plant from these co-located hydrogen facilities. So we're pretty far along in the project. We have a draft report that was put forward to the team back in June, and we're currently making some changes there to better clarify the guidance and put more of an emphasis on the external hazard piece of the hazard. But the beneficial part of this is I think we have a very strong technical basis from the hazard modeling using some existing models. We had 2 young engineers at the NRC perform a very detailed validation effort to understand how the models predict. And here we're concerned with both the hydrogen jet fire as well as the unconfined delayed ignition of the plume, so basically an explosion hazard. So we have a very strong understanding of how the model predicts, as well as what the damage criteria is for various structures and components that are at the power plant facility. Next slide. So I think I covered all this. We're using HIRAM, which is a application that Sandia put together. It uses existing models to predict the hazards. We also are relying on a lot of information that was developed through Idaho and their FPOG, Flexible Plant Operation and Generation Program, where they did a number of studies of these types of co-located hydrogen production facilities. So using that information to inform the process, but in general, it's trying to develop a framework that it can be consistently applied across the spectrum of plants that are proposing these types of facilities. Deadline for having this out is second draft will be available sometime at the end of October, and then we look to finalize it early next calendar year.
All right. Good morning, Adam Lee, also a fire protection engineer in the Office of Research. So as many of the speakers kind of alluded to, PRA is a state of knowledge. We're constantly advancing that state of knowledge. And as we do that, we're updating the methodologies to reflect that. So the methods consolidation project, it's a tool to consolidate fire PRA methodology into a user-friendly, navigable, web-based format. So it's going to provide a high-level synopsis of the existing methods and how those methods fit together into kind of step-by-step framework. So NUREG/CR 6850. And the intent is to support PRA users and the work that they provide, kind of a one-stop shop for resources. And this will help improve efficiency. So the update will include a roadmap on how the methods all fit together into 6850. And it's going to have search functions and accessible links to those incorporated methodologies. So, and I think that is the last slide. So if there's any questions, we'll take those. Okay.
Yeah, what would like? Okay. Okay, we're going to hold questions until we've heard the other speakers for this topic. I believe our next speaker is Ashley Lindman. Would you like to sit at the table, microphone? Okay, great. And if you could introduce yourself, a couple sentences.
Hi, I'm Ashley Lindeman. I am a principal team lead at EPRI in their risk and safety management program. So I have been the fire PRA project manager for, I guess, 12 and a half years at EPRI. So yeah, I'm here today. I know Doug talked it off and kicked it off this morning, discussing about some of the issues affecting NFPA 805 and that rollout specifically. So why they're bringing it up, in 2016, we started a concerted effort to look at what were some of those conservatisms in fire risk. And, we were directed as the industry is looking to accelerate the use of risk-informed applications. How could we prepare the fire PRA methods and provide the methods and tools that were necessary to support, realistic or attaining closer to realism in fire PRA. So that first slide is really the summary of that body of work. So, for basically 2 or 3 years, we worked pretty focusedly and nonstop on improving the methods for fire PRA. So as you can see, there's research on main control room abandonment and the human actions surrounding that. We also worked on basically all the heat release rates for thermal equipment fires, so transients, pumps, and motors. We also looked at the suppression and response of plant personnel for electrical cabinet fires. We found that from looking at the operating experience, right, the plant personnel were often the first people to arrive and were able to suppress the fire prior to that large scale damage that some of the fire PRA models were postulating at the time. So this is just a summary of that work from like the 2018 to the 2020 period. So next slide, please. Is there a slide in the middle? There's what? Okay. All right. I had a revision to the slides that's not in there. But I think Fernando may have sent the ones that before the revision. But I did have a skyline, and if we have time, perhaps maybe we could present that. But really, from the work that we did in 2018 to 2020, we used a pilot plant to assess how the methods were implemented. And right in one station, we saw a 32% reduction in risk from the old methods to the adaptation of the new methods. So I think we saw that there was definitely some low hanging fruit in some of the fire PRA methods and data. So I think that was a success, and it made fire PRAs closer to where we needed to be. With that said, there is still some more work to be done. So I know we spent many years almost immediately after that realism effort looking at high energy arcing faults. So we published a large body of work on that. And one aspect that hasn't been covered today is really realism could go either way. And I think in high energy arcing fault, that's definitely pronounced in the method, right? How fast the plant or the station is able to clear the fault is directly correlated to the zone of influence that's used. So I think that's an area where, right, we had a multidisciplinary team, and we're able to make use of electrical experts, fire modeling experts, and PRA experts to really provide a method that provided realism. And if a vulnerability is found, right, we could look at our electrical protection and actually improve the safety of the plant. So that was a big focus, and that effort wrapped up in 2023. Also just been really working on the hazard work. So how we model oil fires in PRA. We worked with the Office of Research to update the PRA data for incipient detection. And just recently, we published a report on allowing or the technical basis for calculating component-based fire ignition frequencies. So those are kind of a summary of the work that we have done, post that realism effort. All right, next slide. All right, so component-based fire ignition frequencies is one of the areas that we've been strategically working on. When 6850 was developed, we had to calculate the frequencies on a plant-wide basis. So plant A has a frequency of this, and plant B also has that frequency, and it's simply apportioned by the number of equipment per that specific bin. And I think that worked great for the data that we had at the time. But there are some insights that perhaps are nonsensical. So plants with more equipment end up having a lower ignition source frequency than plants that have a small number of equipment. So now that most of the industry has a fire PRA, we are able to obtain that component count data, and we can use that to calculate fire ignition frequencies on a per component basis. So that technical basis was just published in August, and we are working with the Office of Research on the most recent data, the decade of data since we published New Reg 2169, and it looks like we're on track to publish this sometime in probably the second half of 2026. So I just wanted to note on that. Right, and then this just covers the scope of the update of the fire ignition frequencies. So, right, we want to trend the the fire events. So we'll do that using the last decade of data. We'll provide them both on a plant-based and a component-based calculation. So as an analyst, you'll have a choice on what to make. In concert, we also update the non-suppression probabilities with our fire ignition frequencies. So that will happen. And one thing that we didn't really do well in 2169 was update the split fraction. So that will also be updated and consolidated. So the intention is to make this new revision of the fire ignition frequencies, have all the data that you need to update the fire PRA. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this when we talk about realism and where we focus our efforts from, I guess, a research standpoint, this graph has been really helpful. So this, every once in a while, we do what's called the skyline exercise. So we look at the contribution per ignition source bin for all the different bins in fire PRA. So this, kind of helps us see, where the yellow point is the max, the blue dot is the low point, and the average for the sample size that we had is shown in red. So all the way on the left is the electrical cabinet one. So, and that's kind of where, from a research perspective, we've done a lot of the body of work, is because, right, those methods, have been quite conservative, conservatively modeled. So, that's an area where we think is probably going to be the risk driver, but also an area where there was a lot of modeling conservatism. But, right, I think it helps us focus our effort. We're probably not going to spend, many years researching boiler fires or dryer fires. So this just shows kind of how we could look at the results from an ignition source standpoint. And Nick talked about the cable tray ignition project that we have. And this was one of the areas where like the model that we have to calculate time to damage leads to results that postulate damage within 1 or 2 minutes. So we decided to work with the NRC and NIST to do, tests to see how long it would be until ignition was likely to occur. And we tested a variety of configurations, including some more testing this year to understand how penetration seals and conduit seals would affect that fire growth and behavior. Now that testing is complete, we're looking on additional simulations to provide, data points for configurations that couldn't be tested. So hopefully that is complete this year, and then next year we could spend the efforts for the model development and how that could be implemented into fire PRA results. So the intention is that this would provide alternative to calculating your time to damage for the cable tray, which, if the results pan out how they looked in testing, would provide, additional minutes to credit before cable tray time to damage, resulting in lower non-suppression probabilities. Right. And then this I developed for another meeting, but this just kind of shows what the major activities are. And I believe we pretty much talked about all of them with the exception of cable coatings, which the NRC could speak to as they need. But I just wanted to provide this here as a summary of FREP's planning for what reports are going to be available and what major activities that we're working on. So with that, I think that's the last slide. Oh, yeah, and then we always sort of just keep an eye on potential future topics. So, right, some of the areas that we haven't touched are the large yard transformers and the fires, the catastrophic ones and the non-catastrophic. The automatic detection and suppression probabilities are one that, we have a number from, I guess, 2005, which was from a source prior from 2005. So looking at those probabilities and, are they still valid, and what would be an updated number with that. Multi-compartment has always been sort of an analysis struggle. So can we be more efficient now that we've implemented multi-compartment analysis, pretty heavily throughout the industry? What are the lessons learned? So, and then, fire PRA model maintenance, I think that's a challenge for everyone. We've built these models and over the last 10 years have added a lot of complexity. So is there areas that we can relax that, and what should we be looking on when we update our fire PRA models? So I think that is actually the last slide. So, okay, great.
All right, I believe our next speaker is Mary Presley.
Oh, we have no questions? Okay.
Oh, are we taking questions now? Okay, sorry, my bad. All right, let's take some questions now. Again, if you're in the room, raise your hand and I'll run you a microphone. If you are online, raise your hand and we will activate your microphone. All right. You could introduce yourself, please.
Keith Vincent. I am with the PRA manager for Nextera Energy. I'm also the chairman of the risk management committee for the PRA Owners Group. With the methods consolidation slide, how is that going to be a publicly available piece of information that we will be able to reference? Because we already have some efforts ongoing through EPRI where they have a public website that we use. Is that going to be something that's going to be a shared thing for us to be able to reference and use and support with our interactions with our regulatory partners?
Yes. So the methods consolidation website that we're developing is going to be hosted on the NRC website, or not hosted on the NRC website, but it is going to be publicly available. It's going to be any methodology that is affected in New Reg 6850 or new methodology that has been developed in the interim. And so it will be fully referenceable from the resource that we're developing.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Gabe Taylor here. So working with Sandia, they have the PRA methods website. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So they have a site, it's linked from the NRC site, and it basically identifies different PRA methods that are acceptable, and it ties it back to like the source document or the ANS standard. So we're looking at a framework similar to that, where we would have on our website reference to a Sandia site that would address all that.
And then a second question, the skyline chart, Ashley, that you present outlines the contributions to risk from all these different bins that we traditionally associate with 6850 methods. And then I'm going to kind of parody what, parody? No, I'm going to parrot. Thank you. There's a lot of smarter people than me here. See, what Gary said earlier, we still see like a large mass of fire risk being driven by electrical cabinets, and we've talked somewhat about that because it has to do with like the secondary combustibles, but like transient fires. These are events that we don't see as significant precursors. We don't see things driving us there. Are we spending this effort? Are we still driving ourselves to be biased toward artificial creations from the methods? And are there efforts going to be looked at to put ourselves in a more realistic perspective of the operating experience? We've had 6850 for 20 years now. How does our risk profile compare to what, where are we spending our effort and our time as a utility member and as a regulator regulating things when they're not being seen to occur, with almost 100 reactors for 20 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was something that we looked at in 2016. We actually looked through the accident sequence or the ASP precursors. We also looked at the skyline results, and we looked at the fraction of fires that damaged cable trays, and from fire PRA, the modeling was like almost 100% of the cabinet fires escaped the cabinet and caused cabinet damage. When we looked at the fire events, we actually found like it was the opposite insight, and that kicked off a lot of the work. At that point we had new heat release rates, and that helped, but it didn't really address some of the root of the problem. So that was, our answer was 2230 to that. And then, in terms of risk insights for the future, clearly electrical cabinets are, the most populated ignition source. So from the data that we have, we're going to split it up into different bins for fire ignition frequency. So switchgear and load centers, motor control centers, inverters, and cabinets. So I think that should, when implemented, provide kind of new risk insights that hopefully provide better detail. And Nick, I'm not sure if you want to add anything.
Yeah, everything Ashley said is completely spot on. But the other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at that skyline chart is that these advancements in the realism that we have developed over the course of the years, they're not mandated. Not all of the plants have adopted some of these methodologies, these advanced methodologies, because it is more work to actually look at your cabinets, sharpen your pencil, do more detailed analysis. What we're seeing is for those plants that do adopt these more rigorous techniques to look at their electrical enclosures and understand the fire risk, the risk does appreciably drop when you do that work. There are certain instances where you don't have much wiggle room if you're in a very tight configuration or if your cable trays are very close to your electrical cabinet. So the skyline chart is very useful to understand where the bulk of the work is going, but there is a lot of benefit to the increased work that we've done in the electrical enclosure realm to understand how the fire progresses, how it can impact cable trays outside of the cabinet, how fire modeling tools can be best used to utilize or to understand how the fire is going to progress. So I think we have pushed the envelope very far forward in terms of electrical enclosures. There is always more work to be done if you want to get finer detail. But I think right now we're in a place where the tools are available to understand a realistic and a risk from electrical enclosures.
All right, I've got two hands online. Barry, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Barry Quigley. I'm a retired senior reactor operator. Late last century, I wrote a realistic fire scenario for the training simulator. When the scenario was validated, the crew was so confused by seemingly gradually random instrument and component failures, the scenario was terminated and not run on the operating crews. My question is, how is operator confusion due to cable fires on indications and control modeled?
I'm going to take a first stab at this, but that's a great question. I think the crux of the question there is that we can have spurious operations for fire events where the fire is actually going to impact cable and provide the operators in the control room with a spurious signal that might not actually be happening. We saw evidence of that at the Browns Ferry fire, where equipment was turning on or turning off, or the indication was saying that equipment was turning on or turning off. Where it might not have been the case due to spurious operations. We've done a significant level of work to understand spurious operations in terms of how to implement it in a PRA, in terms of what is the actual frequency of having a spurious operation and how to implement it in the PRA. We've also done a lot of work in the HRA field to understand and incorporate how a human may react to certain situations and applied that into the PRA. That's documented in New Reg 1921, volumes 1 and 2. And in addition to that, the plants have have tried to implement a lot of the insights from spurious operation concerns into the operating procedures to identify what are important equipment in certain areas if a fire is observed in that area, and then proceduralize it in their emergency operating procedures. For instance, if they know they have cabling running for the main feed water through a cable spreading room, the emergency operating procedures for fire are going to indicate to the control room operators what important equipment are in that room and what to potentially watch out for in terms of spurious signals for operators. It's a complicated question, but it is inherently added into the fire PRA, both with how we deal with the HRA as well as the spurious operation frequency at this point. As we kind of discussed earlier, it's not a predictive tool. We don't know if something is going to experience a spurious operation, but the tools that we have developed at least make our best attempt to account for that in the fire PRA right now.
I was peripherally involved in the smart hot short issue. What I'm referring to is instrumentation. In my scenario, I wrote the cables affected were steam generator pressure and steam generator level on multiple steam generators. And it so confused the operating crew that even without a spurious operation, we had to terminate the set. Perhaps this is a conversation we could have another time.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Just one additional piece of information, if you're not aware of it, we did do some testing on instrumentation circuits with Sandia. This was probably almost 8-10 years ago. So new reg CR 7244 has a lot of information on how those instrument circuits respond under damaging fire conditions, and that might at least put a perspective on the likelihood of those types of failures.
What was that CR number again, please?
New reg CR 7244.
Thank you.
Just from a practical perspective, I believe the fire response procedures would provide, for the specific fire area, what instrumentation is not affected by fire, right? So I think that would direct the operators to trust certain instruments over others in a complicated fire scenario.
Yeah.
I was the emergency operating procedure coordinator for 5 years, and I don't believe that to be accurate, but we can table that also. I just wanted to get it on the floor.
So this is Suzanne Lloyd with Constellation, also the BWROG IRIR chair. I understand that you referenced, something that was from 30 years ago. In the last 30 years, with the development of fire PRAs, a lot of the OE that we are understanding and the results from the model, the insights from those risk models are being built into and transmitted, and knowledge transfer is being taken care of with the operations crews. We've provided a lot of insight from what we're finding in our models back to the ops crews, and there is a much better understanding now about how fire can cause what used to be unexpected behaviors. They're not as unexpected as they used to be, because the operators are armed with much more OE than they were 30 years ago. So I think that I understand the concern, but at the same time, we've made significant progress, even since my early days in fire PRA in the early 2000s. Having operators understand what could actually happen when we have fires.
Sorry,
sir. We really need to move on from this discussion. We're starting to run behind. So I'm going to ask Mary Presley to join us, please. Mary, you should be able to unmute.
Yep. Can you hear me? Hello?
Mary, I can see you're speaking, but we cannot hear you in the room. Can you speak up?
Unmuted on my end.
Okay, you're starting to come in. Please continue to talk.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So my name is Mary Presley, and I'm going to talk a little bit about digital INC this morning, and then I'll talk about HRA later this afternoon. If you want to go to the next slide. So I'm going to touch on what EPRI is doing in the area of risk and digital systems. And I want to touch on 4 points. One is the supporting the risk-informed, performance-based design process. And that's done through our INC engineering group with strong collaboration with our risk group. And you can see the circles on the right. This is just kind of a quick status of the research and implementation of that research. So I'll also touch on what we're doing with digital systems in terms of methods and data for human factors on the design side and human reliability on the assessment side. And then what we're doing with modeling the digital INC systems in the PRA, including software and common cause failures. And then I'll briefly touch on long-term data collection. So those are the 4 I'm going to hit. And the last one that says automation ? That's an area particularly for new reactors. We've touched on in all of our work automation, but I guess there's an outstanding question is, do we go far enough for the new reactors? And that's kind of an open question for the industry to think about. So if you go to the next slide. So one of the important messages or philosophies when we've been doing this research at EPRI for the last, I don't know, I've been at EPRI for 15 years and they started before I got here. So quite a while, is making sure we integrate our research from design all the way through implementation and operations and configuration risk, both on the design side and on the PRA assessment side. So we should have a continuous and coherent approach at understanding what the risks are in the design side and making sure that those risks are adequately captured in the PRA, as well as the as operated piece. So to the extent to which we can use consistent processes, including overlap of people with skill sets, so using PRA people to help on the risk-informed design side, as well as the PRA assessment, that will make the process of kind of a coherent approach more tenable, and it would improve regulatory interactions, we believe, because we're using common data, common processes, common understandings of where the risk is coming from and how it can be mitigated, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So if you go to the next slide, so that underlies our kind of overall strategy or approach at looking at risk for digital systems. And we have currently an effective tool for risk informing the design and implementation phases through our digital engineering framework and associated processes. So that, if you remember the circles, that work is pretty complete, and many people in industry have been trained on it, and it's in the process of being more broadly implemented. If you go to the next slide. So the digital engineering framework is a systems engineering process where we consider all hazards through a single process. So a hazard is a hazard is a hazard, whether it's triggered by a cybersecurity attack or a human failure or human factors deficiency or software failure or hardware failure. These can all lead to similar or same vulnerabilities in the system. And so through the digital engineering system framework, we've provided a way to consider systematically all hazards and adjudicate them in one process. And in building the digital engineering systems framework, the INC engineering group did a lot of work in testing and validating the methods and benchmarking against other industries that have high safety significance. If you go to the next slide. So this slide kind of summarizes the digital engineering framework, and the backbone of the framework is the digital engineering guide, which is that blue rectangle. And I want to talk a little bit about the kind of the design loop that brings in the risk-informed perspective in the risk-informed design process. So we have that green box of HAZCADs. So that's our risk-informed piece, where we use STPA, Systems Theoretic Processes Analysis, and fault tree analysis combination to identify hazards and associated unsafe control actions. Again, irrespective of how those unsafe control actions come to be, whether it's from hardware failure or human failure, just what can make the system fail if it goes wrong. And then we work with the PRA to do sensitivity assessments to understand the bounding risk and assign risk reliability targets to the associated hazards that are identified. And those risk reliability targets are then fed into what we call downstream processes. And that's those orange boxes. And these downstream processes are topical specific that look at the unsafe control actions and try to understand from the different perspectives how those unsafe control actions can come to be. So what we consider loss scenarios. And so we look at it with the lens, DRAM is digital reliability, so software and hardware. TAM is cybersecurity. HVAM is human factors. And MCAM is electromagnetic compatibility. So each lens is looked at, and then because it's a systems engineering process, it's all gathered up together, including proposed control methods, and then it's adjudicated back through the systems engineering design process and the DEG to make any design changes, and then it gets reevaluated through HAZCADs. And so the design iterates until the risk is acceptable. So I think the key part of this process is that HAZCADs uses not just traditional vulnerability analysis methods. It employs the combination of STPA and fault tree analysis. And there was almost a decade worth of testing of different hazard analysis methods to make sure that we're capturing all the types of failure modes and hazards associated with digital systems. And the combination of STPA and fault tree analysis through our testing showed that that was the most effective hazard analysis process. So that gives us confidence that our design process will be able to capture some of the systematic errors and design errors that typically we worry about when we talk about more complex systems that digital INC and software can introduce. So if we go to the next slide, oh, one more, sorry. So we need to make sure that the PRA model reflects the as-built and as-operated plant. And so we need to make sure that we're appropriately modeling the digital INC systems and its effects on the plant. We can't be overly conservative, but we also can't be overly optimistic. We have to be as realistic as possible. And so we believe that we can use qualitative insights that come from the design process and the qualitative models in the design process, such as DRAM, to help us understand the level of reliability of different portions of our digital INC system. And we are also benchmarking against what data there is available. Some of it's quantitative, some of it's semi-quantitative from the nuclear industry and outside the nuclear industry. And so that research right now is ongoing. And we're hoping early next year we'll have some report to share on this particular topic. The next slide. So there's a couple things I want to point out in the process, though. Software common cause failures. That's an area where we know there has been in the past and probably still presently, based on the NRC's presentation, some conservatism still in uncertainty of what value to use or when to put a model a software common cause failure. And it's important to note, so the INC operating experience, and they looked at billions of hours of data in outside of nuclear, and as well as a thorough deep dive into the nuclear experience, and found that the OE shows that most systematic failures or most potential common cause failures are not like, they're not like typos in the software. They're not those sorts of errors. They're typically things that are latent design defects due to inadequate requirements or uncontrolled or ununderstood system interactions. And these are not the types of root causes that are amenable to just being fixed by diversity, right? If you have inadequate requirements, you have diversely coded systems, but it's still the wrong requirement. So we need to be very careful in understanding if we are too pedantic or too conservative about applying a CCF and trying to imply that diversity fixes it all, that could lead us down a rabbit hole where we've now added additional system complexity, which might increase the potential for latent errors. And so we really need to be careful and have a balanced approach so we're not encouraging poor practices. And so, again, I'm going to go back to HAZCADs. HAZCADs identifies and risk ranks the potential systematic errors from all sources, not just software common causes, and then looks systematically at how control methods can be used to address those potential systematic errors. And so from that perspective, we have a very good qualitative match on how to reduce software common cause failures. And so we need to make sure that our qualitative and we need to make sure that our PRA reflects that that process. And again, that's the piece that we're still working on this report. But we have a concept paper available that we published at the end of last year that kind of outlines some of our thinking in more detail on this topic. Next slide.
Hey, Mary, this is Lance. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but if you could try to wrap it up in the next few minutes, if at all possible.
Sure. 2 minutes. Okay, so our approach generally is to follow the data. We know that we have some unresolved issues right now in industry on boundary conditions, on failure modes, and matching up the data to what were the actual control methods in place. So we know that these will need to be resolved. If you go to the next slide. And I'll just stop here. Our INC group has put into place an annual OE review project where they're collecting OE from all over the world. So INPO, WANO, and also just private relationships with other utilities, and using that OE to enhance the design process. And now we need to figure out how do we match that with the PRA inputs. So I'll stop there for now.
I appreciate that greatly. We do have one more presentation to wedge in before lunch. Suzanne Lloyd. I don't know if she's here in the room with us. Oh, she is. Oh, hey, it's you. I'm sorry. Would you like a microphone or do you want to sit down? Okay.
Good afternoon. Actually, it's afternoon already. Suzanne Lloyd, Constellation, but I am here today on behalf of the BWR Owners Group IRIR Committee, which is the Integrated Risk Committee. Next slide. So today I'll be talking a little bit about model conservatisms and how it works through the utility process. So the current state of the utility models is pretty decent. When I began, particularly with fire PRA in the early 2000s, we were using a lot of conservatism in the models, and our whole goal was to drive risk down because we knew it was too conservative. We're still feeling, in a lot of ways, like it's too conservative. I think we've talked a little bit about that, as Gary and others of my colleagues today have noted that the ASP data doesn't necessarily line up with what's actually going on in real life. As far as what's going on in real life isn't necessarily lining up with what our models are predicting. I'm gonna wait till we get slides up. Sorry, we're having technical difficulties here. Oh no, it's okay. Okay, great, thanks. This one's still good. So we've been developing, the biggest resource that we've noted, in the last, 10 years or so. We feel like our internal events PRAs are fairly stable. They've gotten to a steady state. They're efficient to run. They are. We have sharpened the pencil on those over the years, and they've been in very good shape for quite a while. The fire PRAs, however, are still objectively conservative. We maybe not, they're usable, but we still feel that there is some disconnect between what we see in our plants happening on the day-to-day versus what the models are predicting. Part of that is when we started fire PRA development with a very conservative set of rules, and we continue, as you know, as the folks from EPRI and the NRC research have indicated, we continue to do research on fire PRA refinements. And I know Ashley showed a whole list of of new methods and modeling refinements that we've done over the past several years, actually over the last tens of years, 10 to 20 years. And they tend to chip away slowly at the model conservatism. They are also incredibly expensive and resource heavy for utilities to model. The new methods are very typically benefit one area. They focus on one area. We've tried to go after most of the risk significant kinds of conservatisms. However, we don't get, while we've been driving the risk down, we back towards what we believe is a closer, more accurate model. We don't necessarily see a lot of that movement quickly because it takes so much time and effort in order to get our models updated. So balancing resources for the utilities with everything else that we have to do on the day-to-day in order to help provide insights to our operations, it tends to be a struggle. And sometimes we don't, the fire PRA methods, we do what we can, but we don't necessarily have the resources to kind of blanket put in all of these methods into the models in one broad brush stroke in order to make them reflective of where we really think the risk should be. So next slide. So while we look through our models and we say, yes, we have incorporated this method, we've incorporated that method most of the time in a very narrow band. We use a targeted approach to look at applying that method to risk significant areas, risk significant fires and scenarios. So we haven't fully implemented the method throughout the entire model. So we're still using a combination of conservative methods and new methods within the same model. So that we have worked to get the new method incorporated in, but that also requires us to do focus scope peer review. It's very labor intensive. It can require new walkdowns, new operator interviews. It's not just the PRA organization that gets taxed when we incorporate these new methods. It's our entire organization. As many of you who've worked in the PRA world know, getting really good one-on-one time with operators to do operator interviews, it takes time and effort. They're busier than we are, which is, they're busy running the plant and putting out the day-to-day fires, no pun intended. But, so getting really good sit-down time with them to go through the methodology, to go through the scenario development and understand how they would react in these fire scenarios is not always that easy. And so we have to schedule that out. We get a limited amount of time. And so we have to keep our scope very focused so that we can use that time as wisely as possible. One example, we've been incorporating the HEAF methodology within our fleet at Constellation. That's a months-long process and requires significant amount of resources to update. It requires walkdowns, requires a focus scope peer review, requires an F&O closure of that peer review, and then the full model update and finalization. Once we update the model, we then have to roll that model out so it is reflected in all of our risk-informed programs. In addition to doing just that methodology for a model update, if we're doing a routine normal update, we also are required to do all of the other things we have to do a baseline update. Data collection, review any mods, procedure changes, all of those things that we have to do within our normal scope. So any of the method incorporation is additional scope to our normal scope that we have to complete every 2 cycles. So what we get to do extra for a full cycle or a full model update that we do every 2 cycles has to be very targeted and focused, because we don't necessarily have the resources or the time to get a whole lot of extra work done. So that's why you'll see, I think, a lag in where the methods can take us and where the models sit right now. We still feel they're much better, in much better shape than they were 10 years ago. However, we recognize there's work to be done, and this could be part of that disconnect between the OE we're seeing and what our models are predictive of. So we continue to refine as much as we can. Sometimes we're doing those refinements during SDPs, during other, other emergent issues, and the time pressure is, again, limits the scope of what we can achieve. Next slide. So generally, we have improved significantly over the last several years. I think there's a lot more room for improvement, but I think we're seeing this conservatism in our particularly in our fire models, due to just the lack of our ability. We've gotten a lot busier with risk-informed programs over the last several years, and I don't see that going away unless we can make some big changes in how we look at our normal cycle update and 2-cycle updates. How we focus on these risk significant refinements. It is something that we as an industry need to really take a hard look in the mirror about. Like, what are we doing with our normal updates that give us not a lot of insight versus giving us more ability to focus on scope that is really risk significant, like model conservatism reduction in fire modeling. We'd like to kind of restrike that balance so that we can get better results, more accurate results, get better insights out of our fire model, have more congruency between what we see in reality and what we see in our modeling. So doing that is going to take some effort, I think, on both ours and the regulators' part to make sure that we are truly focusing on what's important. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but I know that's things that we've been discussing on the utility side and are interested in as we move forward, discussing with the regulator further to ensure that we're focusing on what's important as we move forward. So that's my 3 slides. So question, I guess.
Very good. All right, I've got a question here in the room, and then I also have a hand online. So let's start here in the room. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Hello, I'm Dwayne Hardesty, Office of Research, Fire Protection and External Hazards Branch. So I know you mentioned you don't really have a solution or in mind, but as the NRC, I'd like to have you expand a bit on your perspective. I don't think that you want us to slow down in trying to put realism in the fire PRAs, but I am curious, with the trouble that you're expressing in implementing some of these realism and what we intend to be improvements to the fire PRA, what suggestions you might have that we as a regulator could help the industry in implementing them.
I guess a lot of the realism things we see are I think the problem is rooted from a long time ago, right? I think that's part of the issue, is that we made very, very conservative assumptions a long time ago that now we are literally trying to back our way out of, right? Slowly through very detailed research, we're trying to get back to some kind of more realistic modeling that we can live with. And it just seems like we kind of painted ourselves into a corner to a certain extent, and we are slowly like scraping our way out. But one of the things we've discussed, at least in the owners group, is what constitutes for us a baseline model update, a 2-cycle model update. What does that constitute? Right now, it constitutes redoing everything in the standard that the standard requires. So a full data update every 4 years. It requires us to go and do system engineering interviews with every system engineer, doing a complete full scope PRA update. And what do we see out of that? Not a lot of change. When we do those, if we were to not have any method refinement from fire modeling, if we were to just do a fire model and an internal events update based on what mods we put into the plant and what procedure changes we've made, we would see and new data that's the new generic data update, those types of things. We see little to no movement in the numbers, right? But yet we put in a ton of effort. Those things take over a year to do, just a baseline level of effort. So us squeezing in, those are the have to do's, right? Oh, it's per the standard. Us squeezing in fire PRA methods, new methods with focus scope peer reviews and doing all that stuff, unless it gives us major benefit, like sometimes like HEAF does, then we are not inclined to do it because it's good enough. The numbers are good enough for now. They're supporting our risk informed programs. We won't see major changes. That's what we're going to do. We have to do these things. We don't necessarily have the time to do these things. We have to make the priority the have to do. So do we refocus what constitutes a full PRA update? What is that? What makes a full PRA update? Is there a way to extend the 2 cycle? Well, that's tough because that's a license amendment at this point. But do we have ways to ensure that the model is as close to the as-built, as operated as it can be without having to do the full entire scope of the fire PRA or of the PRA update? Because we really don't see a lot of change based on those things. Also doing major mods. So maybe making more room in the have to do's will give us more time to put effort into the refinement. And that's something that I think that we've been discussing as an industry. How can we focus our model updates to what's important? That isn't just checking check boxes from the standard. We all have high quality PRAs at this point. We've showed it through our RICT and 5069 applications. So, it is, if we don't see a lot of movement, why are we doing all this work? We're not getting any more insights. So is that an area we can do?
Understood. Thank you very much for that.
All right, now I've got 2 more hands in the room. Okay, we're going to take a couple more questions and then we're going to break for lunch. So if you could introduce yourself, please.
Oh, I'll make sure we go long. Keith Vincent from NextEra. To respond to your question, I think the existing state of our current light water reactor PRA models, we're in recovery mode from those assumptions, but we have opportunities going forward to not put ourselves into the same bin. So with the next generation, ensure that what we are producing or what you are producing as part of your regulations is not as cobbled together as what was used this morning. I'm not trying to be that derogatory toward New Reg 6850, but make sure we don't put ourselves into a place where the only resource is to now back yourself out. Like, these new methods are great, but I don't have the financial resources to implement all of them everywhere at the next model update. And so I have an artificially biased plant where I have, this very large fire risk number from a plant because, thermal lag is guaranteed to be damaged by a high energy arc fault, which we undid with the latest HEAF stuff, but I have to have it in with the current method. And so in the question that you asked is what can we do? Our existing fleets, like Suzanne talked about, let's figure out how to maybe what an update looks like. But going forward to the next generation, to the next level, the next thing, the next hazard we try to come up with some sort of methodology for, we need to take more time and be more prudent. I realize there's a lot at the time with 6850 and why it was done the way it was, but we have an opportunity to have a lesson learned and take that forward to improve our approach going forward. No, you don't get to.
Brad Dolan, TVA Tennessee Valley Authority. I just wanted to kind of follow on something I think I heard Suzanne say, which is that, a lot of resources can be spent on updates and the rollout applications after, and sometimes there's not a lot of change, so maybe there's not a lot of value returned from that. And I wanted to have an insight or share a perspective, which is we also should be thinking about efficiency, realism in our processes, and that's probably incumbent on us in industry, but we need to find a way to be more efficient in our processes, more realistic. That's all.
Yeah, and that's definitely a focus area for the owners groups.
Sorry, real quick, Chris Hunter, NRC. So just thinking more on event assessment, SDP, say you have a finding, and say it's green on internal events, but then you look at fire and it goes above the green white threshold. However, you're concerned with these, conservatisms. What do you propose, or just some high level thoughts on how you factor that in? I mean, I understand that there's belief, but you don't know exactly where there are. Well, some might be in one direction, but some might be in the other. I'm just trying to figure out. I can appreciate everything that you said, but as far as decision making now, what do we do? What can we do with that, if anything?
Well, right now, I mean, this is a real life example. HEAF for us, when we put HEAF in a model. We had 2 different SDP cases at one plant where the decision came out green once we put HEAF in the model, and it would have come out white had we not. So right now, if that's not in the model, and these conservatives aren't in the model, it defaults to what the SRA presents, and usually it defaults to the worst outcome for us, right? So we have a lot of white findings that I think we come right near the edge, and we fall green white threshold, we fall to the white threshold, right into the white, because of the conservative bias. I'm not sure that we would be getting those. I mean, we had those 2 examples where he put a number squarely below, whereas had it happened a year earlier and HEAF modeling had been not in the model, it would have had a different outcome. And, that's why we're starting to see those types of things now. And it's like, now we're scrambling to get HEAF into our models.
Kevin, they can't hear you online. Kevin, they can't hear you. They can't hear you online. It doesn't matter if you're looking for clarification. They can't hear you online. All right, real quick, because we're heading to lunch and I still have one hand to check online.
All right, first, I'd love to hear that HEAF modeling is having an impact, because we did spend a lot of resources on it. So my second question is, there is difficulty implementing a lot of these new methodologies due to resources and the lag of getting them in. But my question is forward thinking, as well as we said for the new fleet or the new hazards. Do you feel like you have enough engagement or interaction with the NRC to address new issues, or like the frequently asked question process was used before? Are those avenues of communication open so that we can get to them to do any detailed work necessary so that they can be addressed in a timely manner?
I believe so. Yeah, I think that process is working. It's just, we get the new method, and just getting it rolled out it just takes time and resources. That's kind of been our pinch point, not the process.
All right, Barry, your hand's been up, it's been down, you've muted, you've unmuted. Did you have a question?
My question has been answered. Thank you so much.
Oh, great.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone, for all the participation this morning. With that, we are going to break for lunch for an hour, so we'll get started again at 1:30 Eastern. We've got the cafe here, and there's a little food bar in the other building, and there's also a few places that are very quick within walking distance. If you're not sure, grab an NRC person and hopefully they can give you some advice. We will kick back off in an hour. See you then. You can leave bags here.